Have you ever wondered why it's so difficult sometimes to forgive another person? Have you ever thought about it? When you have something against someone, you are the person that carries the weight. You are the person suffering. And today we're going to look at what it looks like to forgive someone, to get unstuck from unforgiveness. We all know the feeling of pain when someone sins against us. We all know what it feels like to experience that initial sense of anger and that emotion of anger against someone. We also know what it feels like to have that bitterness grow in our heart when it comes to someone sinning against us. But I think one of the most devastating effects when it comes to unforgiveness is the fact that there is sometimes a break in relationship with that person. We feel it in close proximity to a person, with friends, with families, with co-workers, sometimes with our spouse. It's very difficult to handle that feeling of unforgiveness and the sin that is done against us. But here's the amazing thing. Jesus does not want us to live stuck in unforgiveness. He came to set an example not only for us, but of us, how we need to deal with unforgiveness in our lives. And there's a story and a parable in Matthew 18 that describes this incredible miracle of forgiveness. Peter comes to Jesus and he asks him, "Lord, how many times do we have to forgive someone?" And Jesus, obviously, he listens to Peter. Peter is a very passionate guy, and Peter says, "Lord, 7 times?" And you have to understand the cultural context, because in the Jewish law, you were obligated to forgive someone only 3 times. The 4th time, you can write someone off or just create distance between yourself and another person. And Jesus obviously wants to teach Peter and the disciples a very important lesson on the forgiveness of God in this moment. And he humors Peter for a moment and says, "No, Peter, not 3 times or not 7 times, but 70 times 7, which actually means limitless, without limit. Because God's forgiveness and his love is without limit. And then Jesus tells a parable. He says that there was a servant who went to his master, and he owed the master 10,000 bags of gold. And he went and pleaded with him to give him grace to forgive that debt in his life. And the master had compassion on him, and he wrote off the debt, set him free, and he went on his way. Then he met a friend of his, another servant in the quarters of the king or the master, and that guy owed the servant only 100 silver coins. And again, that man came to the servant and pleaded for grace, but the servant did not extend the grace. Actually, he grabbed him and choked him and said, "You have to pay the full amount." So the master hears of this, bring in the servant and says, "Well, I've heard what you did with your fellow servant, so now I'm going to keep you accountable for the whole amount, and I'm going to give you over to the tormentors until you pay this amount." And here's the crazy thing about this story is the fact that Jesus is trying to teach us a lesson on God's forgiveness and the way we should forgive one another. Actually, what Jesus is saying here is that the amount or the kind of forgiveness that we extend to another person is not so big as the forgiveness that we receive from God. It outweighs the forgiveness that we extend to another person. Is Jesus diminishing the fact that people sin against us? No, absolutely not. But he's trying to explain that in comparison, the forgiveness that we extend to people is not such a big deal. If you compare it to the incredible grace and forgiveness that we have experienced and received from God. You see, we sometimes struggle to forgive people for various reasons. And it's a human experience. One of the main reasons that we really struggle to extend that forgiveness is the fact that we don't believe that we need forgiveness ourselves. We would say something like, I can't believe that that person did that specific thing to me. I will never do that to someone. You see, the moment we say that, we actually remove ourselves from the category of someone that can make a mistake or that is at fault with another person. We actually elevate ourselves and we diminish our faults and downplay our faults and elevate the faults and the mistakes of others. And that's why Jesus so brilliantly in Matthew 7 again addressed this problem in verse 5. He says, "You hypocrite, first take out the plank out of your own eye, then you will see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's eye." You see what Jesus is saying here, the first question you need to ask yourself if someone sins against you is this: why am I seeing this? Why is this bothering me so much? And then, firstly, go and check your own heart for wrong attitudes, for the sense of, my issues is not so big and my wrongs are not so big than that of my brother. He's actually saying, go and remove the big, massive plank out of your own eye so that you can see the little small speck in your brother's eye. Jesus is saying we all need forgiveness. The second thing why we struggle to forgive others is this: you don't think that you are forgivable. Actually, what you're saying if you're struggling to accept God's forgiveness is you are saying that your sins, your mistakes, are bigger than God's capacity to forgive and to love. It's actually a very prideful thing to think. It's actually a form of unbelief. You see, if God has totally forgiven you, you can receive that with thanksgiving and you can receive that and extend that to others. But if it's difficult for you in your own life to accept God's forgiveness, it's very difficult to pass it on to others. And the third thing, and I think the most difficult thing for us, is not only do we struggle to sometimes receive God's forgiveness, but we struggle to extend that to ourselves. We struggle to forgive ourselves. And it's so amazing in the story of Joseph and his brothers and what they did against him. I mean, when they met up with him in Egypt and he revealed himself as their brother, they were so overwhelmed with guilt and shame in that moment. And Joseph could see that and he said to them, don't let this anger that you have for yourselves linger on you. Forgive yourselves. Don't be angry with yourself. You see, anger for ourselves is something that only we can remove from our own lives. When we receive God's forgiveness, we can extend that to our own hearts. But sometimes it's so difficult because we live in that sense of regret. We've missed out. What could have been if I didn't do that, And it's sometimes difficult to feel forgiven. And the crazy thing is we are sometimes harder on ourselves than God is on us. So it's very, very important to extend His forgiveness to your own life first. What motivates you to forgive others? Let's read together in Luke chapter 23, verse 34. Jesus is hanging on the cross. And listen to this. When they came to the place called the Skull, they crucified him there, along with the criminals, one on his right, one on his left. Then Jesus said, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing." We see this beautiful picture of forgiveness happening on the cross of Calvary. Did the soldiers know what they were doing when they crucified Jesus? Yes, they knew they were killing someone, but they did not see the full implication, obviously, that they were killing the Son of God in that moment. But it seems like Jesus is actually dismissing their sin. He's dismissing their error, but actually, Jesus is displaying the character of God in that moment. He's displaying that God can forgive murderers. Not only just murderers in general, but people who who are killing his own son. I mean, what is the worst sin that you can do against God? It's probably to kill his son, to kill him. And if God can forgive that, he can forgive anyone. And the murderer that is hanging with Jesus on the cross, see that moment where God, through Jesus Christ, forgives murderers for killing his own son. And he must think to himself, well, if God can forgive them, he can forgive me. And he cries out in faith to Jesus, if you are in paradise today, think of me. And Jesus says, yes, I will. And redemption happened in that moment. You see, what motivates us to forgive? Is it an emotion? Is it just a decision that we make to forgive? No. It's a capacity that has been given to us in the person of Jesus Christ to forgive, as he forgave his enemies, the people that crucified the Son of God. Jesus extends that forgiveness to us so that we can extend that to other people. You see, the moment we forgive someone, we set them free, we are displaying the character of God. We are displaying the gospel. It's actually a miracle when you have the capacity to set someone free, to forgive them. I think it's one of the biggest testimonies that God is real, that God is alive. If you forgive someone, you actually shock your enemies and the enemy when you forgive another person. My question to you today is, who is there in your life that you need to set free, to forgive? Maybe it's not possible for you to personally contact that person, but in your own heart and mind, you can set them free and say, I forgive you. Who are there in your life that you actually sinned against and you need to go and ask for forgiveness, to say, I was wrong? You can contact that person. You can reach out, and with the acceptance and forgiveness that you have experienced, you can go and in that step of faith say, I am sorry. Last question. Do you need to maybe forgive yourself today, to set yourself free? It's only by the receiving of the forgiveness of Jesus that we are enabled to extend that forgiveness to others. If this content was helpful in any way, you are welcome to click on the subscribe button for more videos like this.